Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Chullin Daf Ayin Vav. Chodesh Tov to everyone. This month's learning is sponsored by Adam, Carolyn, Michal, Josh, Benny, Izzy, Gali, Shim, Zoe, Zaki, and Yehuda in loving memory of Judith Rosenfeld Hachstadter, Gittel Bakrendel Binyamin Ben Sion on her second yahrzeit. Her curiosity, humor, intellect, and devout nature continues to inspire and hold us accountable. We miss her and think of her in all our pursuits, especially in our Hadron learning, where she would be glad to know that she didn't have to boil more than one egg at a time. Today's daf is sponsored by Elizabeth Kirshner in loving memory of her father, Rabbi Gabriel Kirshner, Harav Gabriel Meir, on his 30th yahrzeit. I miss him more and more as I continue to grow, and I feel him with me in my learning. May his love continue to guide my every step into Torah Masim Tovim. Today's daf is sponsored by Marsha Baum in loving memory of Sam Baum, Chaim Simcha ben Aaron Alevi Veliba, on his 23rd yahrzeit. My dad remains an ever-present role model in my life, despite having been gone for many years. He taught me how to live a Torah-observant life with joy and chesed. He is missed by all who knew him. Okay, with that, we will get started with today's daf. So we're starting out at a Mishnah. We're going to deal with two basic issues today. One is the first part of the Mishnah, and one is the second part of the Mishnah. So there's two different cases, and we're actually going back to Treifot. Okay, if you have an art scroll or a Koren, definitely recommended to look at pictures. There should be pictures up that I had access to, but they're not in the place where I usually find them, so I'll try to see if I can get them up, and maybe at some point I'll be able to get them up on the site. Anyway, right now we're going to do it without pictures. I think it's pretty clear without anyway, but it's helpful to see the pictures and see how all this works. So we're going to talk about, we're getting back to Treifot. Now, why are we getting back to Treifot? It seems that the first part of the Mishnah is really here because of the second part, and the second part relates to Aver Meduldal, which we were talking about before, which is a limb hanging off, which all came about here because we were talking about the animal the fetus, whose limb was outside and is considered separate, and it's like an Aver Minachai, when it is, when it's not, and it's going to be the same kind of thing with a broken bone. Okay, so that seems to be the reason why this is here, but really the first part of the Mishnah really belongs in Elu Treifot. So we have, and we're finally going to get to this sentence we've gone back to a few times when we had in the Treifa Sugya about, sometimes you could cut something higher up, and you would think the higher up on the animal would be more problematic, closer to higher up in the leg, and it's not a treifa, but yet lower down the leg it is a treifa, and then we say, yeah, that teaches you can't really, you don't really know what causes the animal to live or not. In other words, the different elements, and it's not all about what might be logically make sense to you. So we're going to finally find out what that means, or what case they're referring to. So anyway, we're going to start our Mishnah with Behema sheniktechu ragleha. We have an animal whose legs get cut off. Okay? Now, at different points, where Mina arkuva ulamata kshera, Mina arkuva ulamala psula. Okay, from the arkuva and down, okay, the arkuva is like a knee type of thing, okay, where the bones meet. That's like in our legs, it would be a knee. We're going to learn in animals it's a little bit different. They have two spots like that. Okay, so from the arkuva and below is kshera. If the leg is cut off, okay, this is logically, right? The lower down it is, the more disconnected it is from the body, right? The farther away it is from the central part of the body, it's not going to be an issue. Mina arkuva lamala psula. If it's from the up above the arkuva, it's a problem. Okay, v'chein shenital tzomet hagidim. And in addition, if it seems like if the tzomet hagidim, nital literally means is removed, but what they really mean is cut. If it's cut at the convergence of the sinews, okay, which we're going to talk about what that is, then it's a treifa. Okay? So now the problem is, because there's two arkuvot, okay, we don't know which one. Okay, so the leg is made up of, and I'm going to call it, it's going to be like a geometry class we're going to have. Okay, we're going to start from the top is A, B, B, C, C, D. Okay, there's basically the part from the hip where the bone comes out. That's going to be A, B, so the first arkuva. Then we're going to talk about B, C, which is basically the part of the leg called the tibia. That's the middle bone. And that goes from B to C, from the top arkuva to the second arkuva. Then we're going to have CD as the bottom. That's called the metatarsal, okay, or the metatarsus. So that's the bottom part. Okay, so we're just going to refer to this as AB, BC, and CD, okay, or maybe B, which is the arkuva, and C is the arkuva. Okay, so A is at the top, D is at the bottom. That's the way we're going to work here. So that's why images are very helpful, but you can definitely do it without the images. So basically, we don't know what's unclear about this Mishnah. At some point and above is going to be a problem. At some point and below is going to be a problem. The question is it AB is for sure a problem, but BC is not clear. CD is for sure okay if it's broken there. But what about BC? That's not clear here. Okay, and Somat Hagidim we're going to learn is right where the two bottom bones meet at what we call C. That's where the Somat Hagidim is. Okay, so let's leave that part of the Mishnah right now because we're going to wait till the Gemara gets there and tries to explain it. Part 2 of the Mishnah, which we'll only get to later in today's daf. Nishbar ha'etzem, okay, as opposed to we cut the leg off. Here we have a broken bone. Okay, this whole sugya reminds me of like orthopedics, basically. We're going to have a broken bone. Im rov abasar kayam shchitato mitaharto. Now we're not talking about treifa or not treifa. We're talking about, does the shchita remove, okay, this is basically ever miduldal. Now if you have a limb that's hanging off because the bone broke and it's hanging off, so normally we'd say the shchita doesn't cover the ever miduldal, okay, or maybe it does. That's going to be a question. Does the shchita cover the ever miduldal to prevent it from being an ever minachai? Or does it carry impurity like ever minachai? If you remember, ever minachai has impurity like an avela, which means as soon as it's considered an ever minachai, it's immediately tameh. It doesn't need any hechsher lekabel tuma, right? It doesn't need a liquid to come upon it. It's completely tameh, right? It's tameh b'masa. Okay, well, that's what they're going to call it later, but it's basically tameh, okay? Meaning if you carry it, even if you don't touch it, you're going to be tameh. Anyway, they're now going to say, if most of the flesh is still around the bone, then shchita is going to cover this. It's not considered ever meduldal. Why is that? Because the assumption is it's going to heal. If most of the flesh is still around the bone, we know that bones, broken bones, heal themselves. So it will heal. But im lav, if not, ein shchitato mitarto, if it's not covered with a lot of flesh, we'll talk about how much and all that later, but the majority, okay, we'll see what the majority means, but if the majority of the flesh is not there anymore surrounding the bone, then it's not going to heal itself, and then the shchita is not going to, right, ein shchitato mitarto, it's going to be like an ever meduldal, separate from the body, right, and it's going to be tamei tumat nevela. Even if you slaughter that animal, it doesn't matter. Okay, it's really tumat ever minachai, which is equal to tumat nevela. Fine. Put second part aside, now we're going back to part 1. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Amar Rabbi Chia. Okay, the way it's going to work this sugya, we're going to have Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, in the name of Rabbi Chia, and Ula. And they're going to disagree about how to read this Mishnah and what the halacha is. Then we're going to have a second version of Rav Yehuda's position, which is really Rabbi Chia's position, which is going to be stated by Rav Papa, and he's going to read the Mishnah a little bit differently, but in the end, that version is going to come out exactly like Ula in the first. Okay, so in the beginning, we're going to have Rav Yehuda and Ula as opposite opinions or differing opinions. Ula is going to raise a question against Rav Yehuda that Rav Yehuda is not going to be able to answer. And then we're actually going to read a second version of Rav Yehuda, which is going to, again, halacha lamasa, it's going to match completely with Ula. So that's the structure. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Amar Rabbi Chia. Lamata, what does lamata mean? Lamata mina arkuva. Lamala, lamana mina arkuva. Okay, this isn't saying much at all. This is just saying, when it said mina arkuva ulamata kshera, mina arkuva lamala is kshera. We're basically, arkuva lamata kshera and arkuva lamala psula. It basically means there's this one spot, and below it is okay if it breaks, if it's cut, and above it is a problem. Okay, that's not really saying anything different than we thought. Be'ezo arkuva amru. Now here comes the big question. Which arkuva are we talking about? Ba'arkuva hanimkeret im Rosh. Okay, this doesn't really help us. But this means, like other commentaries which help us, but this is the arkuva that they sell with the head. Okay, if you lived in those times, you'd know. Which arkuva do they sell with the head? Well, it happens to be the lower one. Okay, for some reason, I don't know why, they sell the lower one together with the head. So it's the lower one. So basically, he's the more strict opinion. Because as soon as you get, that's basically CD is okay, A, B, and B, C, all a problem. Okay? If it's cut there, it's a treifa. Ula Amar Rabbi Yoshaya. Ula quotes Rabbi Yoshaya as saying, Kenegdo begamal nikar. This is a different way of defining how we're going to say the upper one, but it's the upper one. It's the place where in a camel, it's noticeable, meaning the camel has an opening in its skin where you can see that upper bone. That's by the upper arkuva. There it's revealed in a camel. So now we basically say, he says the upper one. He's going to be much more lenient. basically AB is a problem. BC, which is our debate, BC and obviously CD is no problem if it's cut. So comes Ula, as I told you, he's going to raise a difficulty with Rav Yehuda. Amar Ula Rav Yehuda. Bishlama ledidi da'amina kenegdo begamal nikar. Now I just want to remind you, what does the Mishnah say? It says there's this spot, min arkuva ulamala and arkuva lamata, right, which is kasher and pasul. So whether it's at B or whether it's at C, that's the debate. But then it also said v'chein shenital tzomat hagidim. Now where did we say tzomat hagidim is? At C. So if Rav Yehuda says the cutoff point is C, then Ula's going to say you have a problem with reading the Mishnah, because ledidi, for me, that I say kenegdo begamal nikar, that B is the cutoff point. Haynu dekatani v'chein shenital tzomat hagidim. That's why the Mishnah has to tell you, but it's true that BC and CD are totally fine if it's cut, unless you cut specifically at tzomat hagidim. That's going to be a problem. Okay, that makes perfect sense according to me, because tzomat hagidim is at C. And I said from B and down is totally fine, except for tzomat hagidim is the way I read the Mishnah. But elel yidach, my v'chein shenital tzomat hagidim, according to you, how could you say v'chein shenital tzomat hagidim? That is completely superfluous, because A, B, and B, C are all problematic according to you. And C, right, from under C is totally fine. Now, if nital tzomat hagidim, which is at C, it's a problem. We already know that from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah already told us from C, right, from C and up is a problem. That's by tzomat hagidim. So your position makes no sense. Amalei rekuva below tzomat hagidim, but tzomat hagidim below rekuva. Rav Yehuda answers, even though I told you he's not going to have an answer. You'll see, because the answer is going to be rejected. But he tries to have an answer, and he says, listen. With the Mishnah, when it says v'chein shenital tzomat hagidim, he says, listen, you could cut it off, right? If it's cut at C, it's right, basically above that, right at C, it's a problem. But you could have it cut without it taking out the tzomat hagidim, and you could have tzomat hagidim taken out without it being cut. Those are two different things that could happen at the same spot. Okay, so he says that's what the Mishnah is talking about. To which Rav Ula says there's no way you could say that it's cut without taking out tzomat hagidim, because ha nechtechu katani, it says cut. If something's cut, it's severed. It's severed completely. Right? We're talking about the bottom of the leg was cut off. You can't say, oh, the tzomat hagidim is still there. No, it's entirely cut. So you can't read the Mishnah that way, and therefore you really don't have a way to explain it. And in fact, ishti, Rav Yehuda was silent. However, as happens sometimes in these situations where they're having an argument, right? It happens in our lives all the time. Lebatar dignafik, after he left, all of a sudden, Rav Yehuda realized, I have an answer. He said, "My time lo amrele. Why didn't I say to him, lemata min arkuva, lemala mit tzomat hagidim?" Now they're both at C, but maybe you could say it like this: when it said lemata, it meant lemata from under the tzomat hagidim, or from the lemata is lemata min arkuva at C, but lemala, when we're going to say lemala is a problem, it means above the tzomat hagidim, and there's this little like kind of no man's land. And in that no man's land area, in between the two, we'll say, but if in that no man's land, tzomat hagidim is cut, it's a problem. So I could have answered that. However, Hadar Amar, but after he reconsidered, and he said, wow, it was good I wasn't in the Beit Midrash when I realized this, had this, idea, this answer, because in the end, V'lo amrele v'amreli nechtechu katani. But didn't, when I gave him the first answer, didn't you say to me, but look what the Mishnah says. It says cut. You can't give your explanation because it says it's cut off. Well, hachanami, likewise, if I were to say this, he'd have a retort also. What would his retort be? It says, nami mina arkuva u'lamala katani. It says from the arkuva and above, which would include the tzomat hagidim. There's no way to say there's some no man's land space. Okay, it's pretty clear. From here and down, from that same spot and up. So he would have a retort to me as well. And in the end, in this version, we end up with no answer to Rav Yehuda, as I told you from the beginning. But now, as I already told you, but now we're going to see it inside, Rav Papa is now going to bring a different version of Rav Yehuda. Now, he will read the words in the Mishnah a little bit differently, but he will come to the same conclusion as Ula in the first version. And then we won't have a problem with Rav Yehuda according to this version because it fits in. Rav Papa matnei hachi. So Rav Papa's version is like this. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Amar Rabbi Chia. So again, he's quoting the same person. It's two versions of what he said. Lemata min arkuva umitzomet hagidim. Now when it says lemata and below is fine, we're talking about C and below. Okay, this sounds very much like what he said at the beginning, but don't worry. Lemana mina arkuva. Now I have mitzomet hagidim, but most commentaries take it out. When it says lemala, it means above the arkuva, which we'll explain in a minute what this means. V'chein shenital tzomet hagidim, and that the tzomet hagidim was taken out. V'arkuva gufa kedeula amar Rabbi Yoshaya. The way he's going to explain this is that the arkuva in both parts of the Mishnah are different arkuvas. So now let's explain how he reads the Mishnah. He says, from C and down is okay. From B and up is not okay. And BC it doesn't really discuss. And the only thing it says is, if nital tzomet hagidim, it's going to be a problem, which makes it sound like BC is totally fine. And even though in the beginning they say from C and down is fine, but since it says then from B and up is a problem, it means that BC is actually fine unless shenital tzomet hagidim. So we read the Mishnah a little differently than Ula, because Ula thought the arkuva the whole time is talking about B, the upper arkuva. But in the end, he comes to the same conclusion. From B and up is a problem. From B and down is okay, as long as you didn't cut some of that gidim. And that's Ula's way of reading them. And that's, again, it's a different way of reading the Mishnah, but the meaning of the Mishnah is exactly the same as Ula, according to this version, and therefore there's no questions, really. But there is one question, and this is what we came back to a bunch of times, and like I said, we're going to finally understand this. And then again, I just want to read that last line, which is the arkuva gufa kedeula amar Rabbi Yoshaya. When he reads the last arkuva in the Mishnah, that one he reads like Ula did, which is the upper arkuva. Umi ikamidi di ilu madle pasikla v'chaya metate pasikle umeta. We end up with this issue that if you're up at the top, right, between B and C, higher up, you're totally fine. And if you cut it there, it's not a problem. But yet, if you're at C, which is lower down, at the tzomet hagidim, and you cut it, the animal's not going to live. And therefore, it's going to be a treifa. They say, what? Does that make any sense? The ilu madle, if you went lower down, and if you went higher up, and pasikle, and you cut it, it would live. And mitate, but if you go lower down at the tzomet hagidim, pasikle umeta, does that make any sense? Again, they assume as long as you're farther away from the center of the body of the animal, you should be fine. Just like akuva and lamata is okay, and akuva and lamala is not okay. How could you end up with this position of Rav Yehuda and Ula in the first version, that basically the higher up you go from the tzomet, right? Tzomet hagidim is a problem, but higher up it's not. Again, you go more high, it's a problem, A, B, but B, C is totally fine, even though C itself is a problem. That makes no logical sense. To which they say, right, you have to understand how medicine works. Of course it makes sense how the body works, right? In other words, that's what Rav Ashi says, and this was a line we quoted a whole bunch of times. Rav Ashi, trefo kamidame lahadade, you're comparing trefo one to the other. Ein omrim b'trefo zo dome lezo, don't say this is like this. You can't make these comparisons, if this, then that. Because sharei chotcha mikan umeta, chotcha mikan v'chaya, right? One part could be farther away, and you would think it would be not such an issue, but because it's a central part where all the sinews come out of, the life of the animal is dependent on that. So yeah, don't start saying, oh, we'll make like kav chomers and things like that from one treifa to another, because no, different parts of the body affect the animal in different ways, and one part could kill the animal and one part might not. It doesn't matter which is higher, which is lower, and this is the proof. Okay, so this we quoted a whole bunch of times when we tried to make these comparisons. And I said, you can't make those comparisons, and it all came from here. So again, the arkuva, in general on the leg, the higher up you go, the more problematic it is. But not in this particular issue of the tzomet hagidim. Okay, now, what we want to know is, where exactly is tzomet hagidim? And for this, we're going to have a bit of a machloket. We know it's around C. Question is, where exactly around C? It's some area there between, right, the bottom knee there, the knee bone, somewhere around there. So, Eluhain Tzomet Hagidim. Rava Amal, Rav Ashi. So, we're going to have a lot of opinions here. Da'agrama ulevar. Now, I'm going to explain it the way Rashi explains, but there's other ways of reading this sugya. From the bone and upward. Okay, ulavar means outside, which means from the bone these sinews come out. Okay, this is from the bone, the bottom bone of the leg. Some sinews come out of here, and then, or maybe from the bottom of the bone right above it. Okay, right. Again, there's the femur. We didn't actually name that before. The femur is the top one. That's AB. The tibia is the middle one, and the metatarsus is the bottom one. So now they say, from that bone, which we don't know if it's the bottom of the tibia or the top of the metatarsal, but either which way, right there around C, the sinews start going up, and then at a certain point they come out of the bone, and then they go into the flesh. Just before that, before they go into the flesh, that's the spot. So this is going to be the highest spot. Okay, according to this interpretation, it's a higher spot as the others. Rabba bar Rav Huna amar Rav Ashi da agrama ulegai, legayo or legav. So from the bone and inward. Now, it doesn't really mean inward, at least according to Rosh's interpretation. What it means is from the bone where they come out of the bone, not upward, right? So a lower spot. Rabba bar Rav Huna amar Rav Asi. Okay, the previous was Rabba bar Rav Huna. This is the son of Rabba bar Rav Huna. And it says in the name of Rav Asi, di ilave arkuma. It's above the arkuma. Now, the arkuma is a different bone, which seems to be almost like a knee bone, some small bone. There's different interpretations what exactly it looks like. There's pictures in the Koran, some options, but it's not really clear. But there's some bone in between the tibia and the metatarsus, some bone there, and we're talking about above that bone. Okay, so it's lower than the previous, because the previous one was coming out of the bone, and this is a little bit lower than it's in this other bone that's in between. And Amarle Rabbi Abba, sorry, I skipped one. Okay, so that's above the arkuma. There was a rabbi who sat in front of Rabbi Abba, and he said, da arkuma gufa. He said, no, it's actually on the arkuma bone, not above it, but on it. So that's, again, a little bit lower. So we keep going a little bit lower, each one. So that was 4 opinions. This 4th opinion we're going to have an issue with. Amarle Rabbi Abba, so when this rabbi said in front of Rabbi Abba responded and said, Lo tzitzitule, don't listen to him. Hachi am Rav Yehuda hecha depare tabachim, because Rav Yehuda said it's where the tabachim cut the meat, and when they cut the bones of the animal, and they cut it above the arkuma. This seems to be ilave arkuma, above the arkuma bone. So that's opinion number 3, and he rejects opinion number 4. V'hainu de Rabba b'rei de Rabba bar Rav Huna amar Rav Asi, and this they tell you this matches opinion number 3. Amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel. Okay, now it's a little bit strange because the sugya is usually ordered chronologically, and Shmuel should have come first, and he seems to be talking about the same kind of thing, but this must be like a parallel sugya because he should really be first, so it must be some other sugya, which again there's going to be some crossover. Amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel. Samat hagidim shamru makom shagidim somtim. Now he doesn't really say where is this. He just says it's where the sinews are intertwined with each other, where there's where they're all together before they branch out. Okay, some people say that this is the same as the arkuma gufa, right above the arkuma. That 3rd opinion. The ad kama, and how far does it extend? Okay, we're now going to learn that according to Shmuel, it's not just a spot; it goes up. Okay, from there, and there's a certain length that it's going to be. Amarle Ahume Rabbanan Rabbi Yaakov Shmei, some rabbi. Oh, his name was Rabbi Yaakov. Now they're telling you. Kiavina be Rav Yehuda Amarlan. So Rav Yaakov says when we were at Rav Yehuda, he told us, Shamu mine milta de migav Rav Shmiali. Listen to this that I learned from an amazing person. Umanu, who is this great person? Shmuel. So basically, it's just quoting Shmuel. Somet hagidim shamru makom shagidim tzumtim bo. So that's what we already said. Shmuel says where they're intertwined. Umi makom shetzumtim amikom shemitpashtim. From there all the way up to where they split and they start going into the flesh. Vikama, how long is this? How long is this stretch? Amar Abaye arba'a batate b'Torah. B'Torah is a shore, taf and shin, switch in Aramaic. In a shore, obviously it's going to be different in a shore and a seh, right? A small animal, big animal. In a big animal, it's 4 batade. Okay. Now there's a debate what batade is. Some of the commentaries say it's 4 fingers breadths. Okay, finger breadths. That's not a lot, right? It's a little less than a cubit. And Others say it's actually four tefachim, 4 handbreadths. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean more than a cubit. I meant that's a little less than a tefach. My mistake. That's a little less than a handbreadth, right? Handbreadth is usually 5 fingers. But 4 etzbaot, actually now I'm confused. 4? Did they say it's 4 generally? I don't remember. Okay, anyway, 4 fingers breadths or 4 hands breadths. Okay, that's a big difference. 4 hand breadths seems very long. I don't think it doesn't sound like that would be, but maybe in a shore that would be the case. Bidakan, a small animal, now instead of giving you the length, they now give you, and by the way, I'm sure the 4 is like an estimate because it obviously depends how big the animal is. So in this case, they give you all sorts of signs. Okay, what are the signs? Amar Abaye, Beliti havutzamat hagidim, Belie lo havutzamat hagidim. If it's sticking out, they're jutting out, meaning they're not in the flesh, it's samat hagidim. If they're absorbed in the flesh and you find them inside the flesh, then it's not. And that's what happens here. We've slaughtered the animal and we see that samat hagidim, and we see something's cut, and we want to know, is it by samat hagidim? So you look, are the gidim inside the flesh or outside the flesh? Ashune, havut samat hagidim. Rikiche, lo havut samat hagidim. If they're hard, then the hard ones are the ones that are normally outside, and they're the ones that are samat hagidim. But if they're soft, then it's not. Alime, havut samat hagidim. Katine, lo havut samat hagidim. If they're thick, it's samat hagidim because they're together. Once they branch out, they're going to be obviously thinner. Chivare, if they're white, havut samat hagidim. Lo chivare, lo havut samat hagidim. If they're not white, it's not samat hagidim. Turning out Amud Bet, one machloket here, Marbar of Ashi Amar, kevan dezige afagav de lo chivare. We just said that if they're chivare, if they're not white, then it's not samat hagidim. But he says if they're translucent, then it's like they're white. Now, they don't have to be exactly white. Translucent is also a sign that it's samat hagidim. Okay. Now we're moving to how much of the samat hagidim needs to be cut. So we say, Amar Amemar Mishmei Rav Tzvi, Tlata chute have. There's 3 sinews where these converge. Chad alima utrei katine. One is very thick and 2 are thinner, or very thick, but one is thick and 2 are thin. So this is all about, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? So the first opinion says, because you have 1 thick and 2 thin, ifzik alima, because you need a rove to be cut. So what does he say? What constitutes rove? Ifzik alima, azda rov binyan. If you cut the thick one, there went the main structure of the convergence of the sinews, because most of it's gone. So it's a problem. Ifzik katine, if the 2 thinner ones, so that might not cover rov binyan, because you still have the majority, because the thick one is very thick. It's the majority of the sinews, the convergence of the sinews, but azda rov binyan. But you lost 2 out of 3. So that's also a majority. Either way you look at it, you lost a majority. Either rov minyan or rov binyan. Marbar of Ashi matne lekula. He looks at the glass half full, and he says the exact opposite, and he's lenient. If the kalima ha'ika rov minyan. If the thick one, well, you still have 2 out of 3, so you still have rov intact. If sakatine, if the small ones get cut, ha'ika rov binyan, you still have the thicker one, and you end up with the majority of the area where the convergence of the sinews was is still there, so you're fine. Ba'ofot, what about in birds? Shitzar chute havi, there's 16 sinews, very different than an animal. If sechad minayu treifa, but if one of them is cut, it's a treifa. So why is this? The commentaries suggest different things. The Rimi Lunil says it's because, like we saw with the fish, it's very easy for them to die. Also with the birds, it's much easier for them to die than for an animal. And maybe that's why. So with one cut, it's already the animal's going to die. According to Tosfot, if one gets cut, it's going to cause all the others to get cut. So even if you slaughter the animal and you see only one is cut, it's just a matter of time till the other ones would have been cut, and it would have kind of messed up all the other ones, and maybe that's the reason. Okay, I'm a Marbar of Ashi. Havakiimna kameh da'aba. Okay, I was before my father, which is Rav Ashi. V'ai to the kameh ofa, and they brought him a bird. Ubadak ve'eshkach b'chamesar. He found 15 sinews. So now, what would you think? He would make it a treifa. However, one looked a little different than the others. Naftse, he broke it apart. Ve'ashkach trei, and it turned out it was 2. So then he realized there really were 16, and he made the animal kosher, right? This shows the attempts of the rabbis not to cause a monetary loss to anyone and try to figure out how to machshir it, and he did. Okay, so one last thing about the tzumat hagidim, and then we'll move on to the bone. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Tzomet hagidim she'amru berubo. The tzomet hagidim has to be cut in the majority. I assume they mean, right, if the sinews are going downward, the majority of them going, across has to be cut. I assume they don't mean the length. That's my assumption, but I am suggesting it, I'm raising it as a possibility. Maybe it's length, but I assume they mean the width of them. So they have to be cut berubo. Okay, that's Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So the Gemara asks, and we're going to have two versions of this. The first version is my rubo, birov echad mehem. Rav said the majority of one of them needs to be cut. So Kiamarita Kamei de Shmuel, so Rav Yehuda comes and says, listen, I brought this in front of Shmuel. I told him what Rav said. Amarli, he said to me, I don't understand. Michti tlatahavu, if there's three of them, ki mifsek chad minayu legamre ha'ika trey. Even if you cut one completely, forget about here, you said you cut the majority of one. If one was completely cut, you would still have two more. Majority would still be there. So I don't understand what you're talking about. Now, if you read Shmuel carefully, you'll understand that what was he pointing out here? Tama di'ika trey. In other words, we're leaving Rav. Rav, he raises a question with. And then we focus on Shmuel for a minute. The fact is, Shmuel seems to be saying, because you still have two left, it's okay. But what would you assume then? Ha'ik leika trey, lo. But if you cut the majority, you cut 2/3, okay? Then it wouldn't be okay, right? Or even a little less than that, it wouldn't be okay. But this is pliga de Rabbanai. This interpretation of Shmuel, what Rabbi Yehuda said, Shmuel said, seems to disagree with Rabbanai. To Amar Rabbanai, Amar Shmuel, because Rabbanai quoted Shmuel as saying, Somet hagidim afilu lo nishayer ba'ela kechut hasarbal kshera. Rashi even says there's like a teeny bit of it. Even if only a little bit is left, it's fine. You don't even need a majority for it to be kasher. Okay, that's version 1. Ika da'amre, some people say my rubo rov kol echad ve'echad. Rubo is the majority of each one. Okay, that as long as you have a majority, if you cut a majority of each of the three, it's a problem. Not one, which didn't make any sense. Okay, but you cut the majority of each of the three of them, it's a problem. Ki amarita kamei de Shmuel. Now in this version, when Rav Yehuda tells this to Shmuel, Amarli michte tlatavu. He says, listen, if there's three, ha'ika tilta b'kol chavachad. There's a third in each one. Now if you add a third, and a third, you get a whole one. This is like there's one whole sinew, even though there isn't, but it's like, because it's a convergence of three, you end up still with one. That should be enough to say it's kosher. And that Messiah leila Rabbanai, Amar Rabbanai. Now this fits with what Rabbanai said according to this. This version seems to work a lot better, even though it's a little bit weird why he would say that one is, just because it's a third, it should be okay. It's still not really the rov. So I think Shmuel's position is more concerning here as opposed to Rav's position in the previous version. But at least this one fits, that what Rav Yehuda said fits with Rabbanai, because what did Rabbanai say in the name of Shmuel? By the way, chut sarbal sarbal is like a cloak or some sort of garment. So it's like some garment, you close the garment with a string. Like it means like some small, like the width of a string of a sarbal. It's something very small. So anyway, even if all you have is ksheran, that fits. You don't need a lot to be left for it to still be okay. Let's just summarize the daf until this point, and then we'll go on to the second part. So we started with, if we just focus on the first part of the Mishnah, we had this Mishnah that talked about from the Arkuva and below is fine if it's cut, from the Arkuva and above it's a problem, but we also had the Tzomet HaGidim, and then we had we had a machloka between Rav Yehuda, who quoted Rabbi Chia, who quoted Rabbi Chia, and Ula, about which Arkuva, the lower one or the upper one. Then we said, but the one who says the lower one, that's the same spot as Tzomet HaGidim, that really doesn't make sense. That was Rav Yehuda. In version 2, Rav Yehuda said the same thing as Ula, just read a few of the words of the Mishnah differently. Each Arkuva was referring to a different one, but in the end the conclusion was that middle section is totally fine, other than if you do it at Tzomet HaGidim. That led us to the conversation of the machloket, the second machloket, which was where exactly is Tzomet HaGidim, where above that bone, how high above the bone, where in the bone is it part of that middle bone in between the two, between the tibia and the metatarsus. And then we said, like Shmuel, that it basically starts in one spot and goes up, and it's about 4 finger breadths wide, if we go with that interpretation in a big animal. And then we had all different ways of identifying it in a small animal. And then we basically talked about the rove and what needs to be cut and what makes it a problem. We had 2 kind of issues, one about the thicker and the too thin ones. And then we talked about the majority and what majority. And we had two different versions of Rav and Shmuel and what they said, according to Rav Yehuda. And then what Rav and I said, Shmuel said, which either went with Rav Yehuda or didn't go with Rav Yehuda. And that's what we did. Now we're going to move on to broken bones. So Nishbar ha'etzem. So again, let's read the Mishnah and then we'll see what we do with this. If Rov Basar is Kayam, most of the flesh is intact, then the Shchita prevents this from being called an Ever Meduldal. It's not an Ever Meduldal because it has the flesh around it and that keeps the bone in place, right? And that'll help the bone heal. If not, then it's an Ever Meduldal. Ever Meduldal is Ever Menachai, so if you slaughter the animal, that's considered separate from the animal. It's a trait. It's a nevela. It, again, has laws of a nevela. Okay, you can't eat it and it would pass on impurity. Nishbar ha'etzem. So Amar Rav, Lemala mina arkuvan. Now Rav is going to start differentiating. Where is this bone broken? And connect it with the beginning part of the Mishnah. If it's above the arkuva, im rov basar kayam zev mutar. Im lav zev asur. If it's in the area where it's going to make the animal a treifa, if you would cut it, and you have this broken bone, well, again, it's going to depend if there's rov basar or not. If there's rov basar, it doesn't matter that it's in this area which would make the animal a treifa, because anyway, it'll heal itself. So it's not a treifa, even if it's in the problematic area. And therefore, zev meaning both the limb and the animal. In other words, the animal's not a treifa, so you can eat the animal, and obviously you can eat the limb. Im lav, if not though, if it's not rov basar, and it's in that problematic area where it could make the animal a treifa, and there's no flesh around it, or the majority of the flesh isn't there, which means it's not going to heal, then basically it makes the animal a treifa. And zev is asur, you can't eat the animal, and obviously you can't eat the limb. But lemata mina arkuva, but if it's in the lower part, where it would make the animal a treifa, so you can see where this is going, let's see what he says. In rov basar kayam, obviously zev mutar, because even in the upper part, which was more problematic, we said both of them are permitted, because it'll heal. Vim lav, now what if not? Now the animal's not going to be a treifa, but it is an Ever Meduldal because there's no flesh, right? You don't have the majority of the flesh anymore. So we're going to view this as an Ever Meduldal, and the Ever is a sword. You can't eat that limb. It's an Ever Menachai, and it will also be impure. And the Behemah is muteret, but it doesn't make the animal a treifa because there's a broken bone that won't heal, but it's in that area where we're not worried about it killing the animal. It's at that bottom CD area of the leg. Ushmuel amar, bein lamala bein lamata, im rova basar kayam zev mutar. Shmuel disagrees with Rav and says whether it's above, whether it's below, if the majority of the flesh is intact, zev mutar. Okay, that obviously no one thought otherwise, but here's his chidush, which we're going to have trouble with. Im lav, if not, because Rav made perfect sense. If not, the aver asur ubehema muteret. If it's higher up and there's not rov flesh, right? Whether it's higher up or whether lower down, either which way, the animal is permitted. Okay? Even though theoretically we said if you cut it, right? So what's the difference between cut and a broken bone? It should be the same. The animal should be a treifa. But yet he says, no, the aver is meduldal, and we'll call that an aver menachai. But the animal itself is permitted. So matkef la Rav Nachman l'Shmuel. Often says to Shmuel, Yomru aver mimenu mutal b'ashpa muteret. You're going to say the limb is detached and we have to throw it in the garbage, right? And because it's an aver menachai, and it's in a place where it's problematic, and the animal is permitted. And it doesn't make any sense that we're throwing this aver in the garbage, and yet you're going to say the animal's not a treifa. So Amalei Rav Acha bar Rav Huna le Rav Nachman. Now, counter question. Rav Acha bar Rav Huna comes to Rav Nachman and says, Rav also has a case where we're going to throw out the aver and the animal's permitted. Which case did he say it about? When it's mina arkuva ulamata, he said it. Right? L'Rav Nami Yomru aver mimenu mutal b'ashpa muteret. He said if it's down below and there's no flesh, the aver is meduldal. You have to throw it in the garbage because it's aver menachai. But the animal is permitted. So he said, Rav's also got a problem with a case where he throws the aver in the garbage and the animal's permitted. Why didn't you ask the question on Rav? And the answer is pretty obvious. Amar lehachi kamin. What I meant to say is, Rav only says it in a case where the animal's obviously going to live because it's from the lower part. I was asking on Shmuel because he said when it's in the higher part and the animal's not going to live, and then how could you not say the animal's a treifa? And that's what he said. So let's read it. Aver shechaya mimena mutal ba'ashpa umuteri. If you're going to throw out this limb from up above, right above that upper one, from the AB area, from what we call the femur, that part you're going to throw in the garbage when we know the animal's life is dependent upon it, and then you're going to say, and the animal's permitted? That makes no sense. The animal has to be a treifa. Okay, we don't have an answer to Shmuel. Okay, but obviously the question is only according to Shmuel, because according to Rav, we're throwing out the metatarsal bone. That's not a problematic, right? That's not something that's going to make the animal a treifa. So if that's an Ever Menachai, no one's going to say, oh, how could it be the animal's permitted? Okay, but Shalchumitam halachat hilchata kavatei Rav. They sent from Israel a psak. They said, we paskin like Rav. Hadar shalchu, but then they sent another message, kavatei to Shmuel. And this is another message, paskining like Shmuel. Hadar shalchu kavatei to Rav. Then they sent again like Rav, and they added Ever Atzmo Matame B'Masa. And they added the following thing. Not only is it Ever Menachai in terms of you can't eat it, but it's Ever Menachai for the purposes of impurity. It has impurity like an Ever Menachai, which is equal to an Avela, which has Masa. Now, I mentioned the issue of Tumah, but it really didn't say it in the Mishnah, and it didn't say it here either. So this is where it gets introduced. And from that, Rav Chisda is going to ask a difficulty from something we learned at Daf Ayin Gimel. So not so long ago. Mativ Rav Chisda. If you remember in this conversation between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about whether it's the limb that's extended outside, is it mitame, the rest of the fetus, maga nevela or maga treifa, right? Is it like a nevela or a treifa? And one of the arguments Rabbi Meir was saying was, according to you, you think it's just a treifa, not a nevela. Im tiarash chitat treifa utava te'evar midodal ba davar shegufa titaheret ha'ubar davar she'en gufa. If the shchita, if a shchita of a treifa is going to save an Ever Menachai, this is the point that's important for us. In Ever Midul, if you have a limb hanging off, the shchita actually prevents it from becoming an Avela. Okay, that completely disagrees with what we just said. We made the animal a treifa, right? We slaughtered it. The animal was a treifa because the bone was broken, right? Was hanging off. And we slaughtered it, and they said it's tumat nevela. Now he says if you slaughter it, you can't eat the aver, but it's not, because you slaughtered the animal, it actually protects, since the aver is hanging still from there, it's a little bit attached, it's actually covered and it's not an avela. Okay, now the rest of the argument isn't important, but he said that's because when it does that, it's because the aver that's hanging is part of the body, so it can be incorporated and protected from becoming impure. But the teret ha'ubar, but the yad of the ubar, the leg that's sticking out, is not part of the animal that you're slaughtering, right? It's an extension of the fetus, which is in that animal, but it shouldn't work for that. That was Rabbi Meir's argument. The point is, it's very clear that in the Ever Midul is protected by the shchita, and it doesn't become a nevela, even though you can't eat it. So Amarle Rabba has a counter response to this question with saying, why don't you ask a better question? Hadra pirche lamalach. Why did you go so far to find some bright that nobody really knows, although we knew it, but okay. But nobody really knows that. Why did you ask from a Mishnah? There's a Mishnah that contradicts. And this also we saw in Daf Ayin Gimel. The subject of that Mishnah was an Aver HaMidul Dal and Basar HaMidul Dal, which is our case, the Aver and the flesh, but we're talking about the limb. Nishchita behema, if the animal was slaughtered, Huchshiru b'damei divrei Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Omer lo huchshiru. They have this debate. Is the blood of the mother going to cover the basar, right, the thing that's hanging out? Or the blood of the shchit of an animal, is it going to cover the Aver HaMidul Dal or not, or the Basar HaMidul Dal? And meaning, is it going to make it susceptible to impurity? Is it going to be like the liquid came upon it, even though it didn't touch it, but it touched the body? Is that going to make it susceptible to impurity for the Aver HaMidul Dal or the Basar HaMidul Dal? So what do you see here? If it needs susceptibility to impurity in order to become impure, that's because we're viewing it as meat, not as an Ever Menachai. Ever Menachai, I told you before, it becomes immediately impure. It doesn't need anything to make it susceptible to impurity. So this looks like it doesn't have Ever Menachai. So why don't you ask from that Mishnah? To which they answer, you might remember this, you might not remember this, but they said, also on Ayin Gimel we had an issue with this, and in the end we said, maybe it actually means the Huchshiru in plural is not the Aver and the Basar, it's two types of Basar Midul Dal. Okay, and maybe it's not even talking about the Aver. The limb, for sure, would be Aver Menachai. Flesh that's hanging doesn't have a law of Aver Menachai, and maybe that's what it's talking about. Okay, so that's why he asked it from the Braita. In the end, there's no answer to the question. Kiselik Rabbi Zera Eshkachela Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba. It should be according to Rashi because he's a student of Rav and he's going to quote Rav in a minute. He quotes Rav. Okay? So they said, oh, good interpretation. And in fact, that's how the Aryoch in Babel translates it. Who's the Aryoch in Babel? Manu? Aryoch Manu? Shmuel. Okay, so when Rabbi Yirmiyah quotes Rav in Israel, he says, right, they said to him, that's great. That's what Shmuel said as well. Okay, Aryoch, there's a whole debate why he's called Aryoch. It comes from Aryoch Melech El-Asar maybe, or it comes from Aryeh. Somehow it means king. Shmuel's called king because we pass him like him in Dinei Mamonot. Anyway, there's different interpretations. I'm not going to get hung up on that right now, but the main problem is, what do you mean Shmuel holds like Rav? V'hamiflag pali. We just had this whole machloket, Rav and Shmuel. Remember, Shmuel's position really made no sense. So they answer, Hadrabe Shmuel legabe de Rav. Shmuel apparently agreed with Rav in the end. And that's really because there was difficulty with Shmuel's position. Remember, we didn't have an answer. It didn't make any sense that it's Avram and Achai, and it's at this high point, and it's considered cut off, and then we're going to say the animal's not a treifa. Of course the animal's a treifa if the bone gets cut off at the upper point. Tanu Rabbanan. Our last topic for today is going to be about the hide. Okay, now we talked about basar. If the basar is the row of basar is there, then it protects the it will heal, and then there's no issue here at all. It's not an Ever Medulda. So now we quote a Brighton. Nishbar etzem v'yatsa lachutz. If it came out of place, im or ubasar chofet rubo. Now our Mishnah said basar chofet rubo. It didn't say anything about the hide. This one says hide and the meat. Then it's mutar. Im lav asur. If not, it's forbidden. Kama rubo. The first thing we have to understand, what is rov? Ki atu Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan rov of yo, most of the thickness. Amarle va'amrila rov hekefot. There's a debate about what he said, whether it was, okay, again, there's different interpretations of what each of these means, but let's try this one of them. Rov of yo means if it covers like where it's broken, the broken piece. So if it covers most of the broken piece, then it's good. Rov hekefo is it surrounds the bone on the outside. The majority is surrounded. Amar Papa, he always likes to be harmonious. Hilkach being a rov of yo, being a rov hekefo. You need both. Okay. Amar Ula, you need to have a majority there and a majority there in order to say this is permitted, right? It's not an Ever Medulda. Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, or Hareu Kebasar. Okay, we're going to have two versions of what Ula says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The first is, or is like flesh. So you could have only or only flesh, and that would be fine, as long as it covers the majority of, again, the ovyo and the kefo, but you'd be good. Amar Rav Nachman le'ula, v'leim amar, or mitzaref lebasar. Wouldn't you think that the basar is more important? And wouldn't you say, especially our Mishnah said only basar, maybe the or can fill in a little more. So if you have meat and together they cover, it would work. But or by itself, I wouldn't think that would work. So, and he says, Dahar or ubasar katani. It says in the Braita here, or and basar. It sounds like you need both. Amar lei, anan or ubasar tanini. He says, my version is or basar. Okay, so it's either the hide or the basar. That's how I have this Braita. But some people say that Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, or Mitzaref Lebasar, that what we had in the words of the Rav Nachman was actually in the words of Ula. You can put the two together. You can have half, as long as it covers the majority, you're good. Then Rav Nachman comes and asks Ula a different question. Amar Rav Nachman Ula, V'leim Amar or Mashlim Lebasar. Maybe the majority of the majority that you require should be flesh, and only a little bit you can fill in with hide. Because again, hide seems to be less of a thing. Lechumra, and then that would be more machmir. You would need still most of that majority that's required should be majority meat, flesh. Amarle anu uvada yadana. So Ula answers him, I have a case. I'll show you that proves my point. Hu bar Gozala. There was a chick, or I don't know exactly how to translate it, but in the bird family. To have a be Rabbi Yitzchak to or mitzaref lebasar hava. There was a case where the or was mitzaref to the meat. It was, part. It wasn't like majority flesh. And he machshired it. Amarle, bar gozala kamart. You're talking about birds. Bar gozala de rakich shani. There, the hide is very soft. It's more fleshy, as opposed to in an animal where it's very hard and it's very different from the flesh. And there, I wouldn't agree. So your proof is not a great proof. So we have two versions of how or and basar can get mixed in, and we have altogether three opinions because there were, according to one version, there was a machloket about two options. You need, can you do without any meat, or can you just say half works? And according to the second version, for sure, you need some meat. The question is, can it be half, or does it have to be majority meat and minority or? And again, this was all the second part of today's daf, which was talking about the broken bone, and we had the machloket Rav and Shmuel. Does it depend on the placement in the leg? If it has no flesh, are we going to then say it's a treifa, which seemed the logical one, which is the one they end up passing like, and even Shmuel ends up agreeing with Rav, that it is going to be a treifa if it's broken above. Okay, and it doesn't have the majority of the flesh. And then we got into that it's also matame masa, and that we had some difficulty from a braita, right? Because it seemed to say the Ever Meduldal is actually considered part of the animal that is protected. If you have shchita, it won't make it a treifa, both from a braita and from a mishnah. And then, we didn't really answer that question either. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Chodesh Tov.